Hey, it's Bryan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Go Be More podcast. For those of you who've never heard of Go Be More Apparel, I just want to take a moment to tell you what we're about. We believe we all have a responsibility to chase our dreams, and we want to give you the motivation, the mindset, and the permission to do it. We want our apparel to be a constant reminder of your commitment to achieving your goals. We want the words Go Be More to remind you of your dreams and your next steps every time you see them. As for this podcast, every Tuesday I speak with Jon Rankin, world-class miler, kidney disease survivor, and founder of Go Be More, about topics that will help to unlock your potential and get you moving forward. Every Friday, we interview a special guest to learn more about their Go Be More journey. In this episode, we discuss the 5 levels of mastery for any skill. The process of going from level 1, understanding, to level 5, mastery, can take a lifetime. Each level becomes progressively harder to achieve, but it opens up more opportunities and options for you as well. Before we get to the 5 levels, Jon and I discuss how to identify your areas for improvement and the importance of feedback and getting outside your comfort zone. Jon shares how he made the leap to being an elite miler by, as he puts it, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. This episode has a lot to help you think strategically about improving your skills network. Alright, on to the episode. Hey Jon, how you doing?
Bryan, what's up, brother? Doing pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm excited to be back on the podcast.
Yes, sir. Me too.
I'm excited to have Howie's interview. Just came out last Friday, and what a great conversation with him. He is a really remarkable person.
Yeah, it was so cool being able to hear his story in a way that I've never thought about it before. Being able just to connect with somebody that you've known for, almost nearly half my life, and still thinking about or finding out about the stuff that you really didn't know. And I think that's kind of the case with a lot of people that we have in our lives. You think you know their story, but when you really start to ask them questions and they get to start sharing and diving into it, you learn a whole lot more. You find out that there are layers to the story that you've never really thought about before. And I definitely experienced that with Howie's interview. Such an honor to be able to do it, and what a great person.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So for me, this podcast is a follow-on from last week, actually. And we talked last week about the idea of multiplier skills. And we've been talking about skills a lot, and I think it's really important for thinking about your future, thinking about creating the path that you want to create, is having a very productive and strategic view on how to develop skills. And my personal structure for how I think about skills is as a network. And my quick recap on this is just that you have lots of skills, and the way you connect them and the way you make unique combinations of your skills is what really creates the opportunities for you, that really opens the doors for you. And within those, there are certain skills that I call multiplier skills, which are universal and that have the ability to sort of amplify all the other skills you have. So if you have a lot of knowledge about, let's just say something like crossword puzzles, or something that doesn't seem like it has a ton of potential to like create a career path because it's just a small hobby. If you have really strong multiplier skills, which might be the ability to do public speaking, the ability to write well, to interact with people, to do things. You can use those skills to take your passionate thing that you're really good at, like crossword puzzles, and actually create a career out of them. And I'm actually using this example because the other day I saw this video. It's a 25-minute video of a guy on YouTube solving a Sudoku puzzle. And it got sent to me, and it said, hey, you're going to really enjoy this video. And I thought, it's a guy doing Sudoku. Like, I don't know why I'm going to want to watch this video. And yet
I'd watch that video. I love Sudoku.
No, it's great. And the thing is, the puzzle has some unique conditions and all this stuff. But the thing I noticed about it is that this guy, I don't remember his name. I have to look it up. I'll try to find the video in the show notes. But he is clearly loves these puzzles and loves doing these kinds of things. But he's made a career out of making a YouTube channel where he films himself doing these puzzles, and he talks it through as he does it, and he works through, and he just shows his personality, and he's clearly got the skills, some combination of skills that works for what he's doing. And who would have thought that you could take your passion for doing Sudoku puzzles and turn it into a business, turn it into a side job? I don't know how much money he makes out of it, but the reality is,
cool.
these opportunities are out there. That's one of the things that stood out to me as I watched it. I was watching it in part thinking, wow, what an amazing Sudoku puzzle. And then the other part was thinking, what an amazing thing this guy's created for himself, right? It's whether it's a side job or it's a full-time job, he's taking his passion and turning it into an amazing opportunity, right?
Why can't you do that with anything, though? I mean, that's the question. When you say that, and it is mind-blowing to me, because I'm like, I love Sudoku. I would love to be paid to do Sudoku all the time.
Exactly, right?
That would be amazing. Like, I'm so serious. Like, if I could do the things that I love to do and be paid for it, and then I have the freedom to do it whenever I want because I'm working for myself, I mean, that's the dream that I have. When I get to taste that a little bit more and more, I'm like, man, I can't go back to working for somebody else. I got to find ways to keep working for myself and doing the things that I enjoy doing, spending those extra hours working on something, but it's a part of what I love. Man, that's the dream. So hearing that somebody's doing that with Sudoku, that's mind-blowing, but that's also exciting.
Well, it is. I think there's people doing it all over the place. I mean, we know people we know who are, whether they've got their podcast on the topics that they want to talk about, whether they've got their YouTube channels, whether they're, and it's not all digital. Digital makes it easy, but it's not, it doesn't have to be. It's just, there are so many tools today to help you turn your niche passion into an opportunity or a business or whatever you want it to make it, right?
I believe that. I believe that in talking with other entrepreneurs, other people similar to us that are trying to grow a business or start a business, and they're really committed to doing it, and they're going through the struggle of just figuring out, well, where do I start? What do I do? What's the mentality that I should have when I'm struggling? What should I be thinking to overcome that struggle? The thing that is so important to me, and I have somebody in mind that I'm thinking about, it's my friend Tony, and she has a consulting business, and we've been talking over the past couple of weeks, and I wasn't intending to, quote unquote, coach her, but we've been confiding in each other in terms of our experience, and the thing that I'm happiest about for her is that she has actually chosen to take what she's knowledgeable about and passionate about and identified a specific group of people that she wants to help, female entrepreneurs over 40, and she's figuring out how to develop a business based on her skill set, her educational background, and her passion. And I'm excited for her because it is a journey, and I could tell that she's happy doing it, even though she's going through the grind initially of figuring out how to put it all together. I truly believe that she's going to get there, and one of the things that we say a lot is hey, you're doing what you love, you're in it for the long game, And so Figuring out how to monetize that passion is quite tricky, I think, in a lot of ways, because we sometimes don't even believe that it's possible. But I do believe that it's worth figuring out because it is possible. I mean, if you could do it with Sudoku, I think you could do it with anything.
I think that's 100% true. The way you think about, how you approach this challenge of developing your skills network so that it's a strong network that supports your goals and your dreams, what you want to achieve, is a really important thing to consider, to think about, no matter what age you are, whether you're a high schooler or university student or you're middle-aged and you have a family. If you have something you want to do, something you want to achieve, and you want to get there, I think it's important to have a concept of how your skills work together and what skills would boost your ability to get where you want to go fastest. But then, not just that, thinking about what's the most practical for you to pursue. There's thousands of things you could pursue to do. So which one is the right one for you to pursue? What should you be doing versus what should you be finding someone else to help you with? When you go to pursue something, how long should you do it before you decide, okay, that's enough, right? I think this is enough for my purposes to get to this level, right? Of whatever the ability is. And I think those are really difficult questions. I actually don't think there's a right answer. I can't say on this podcast, all of you listening should get to this level and then you're good, because it's going to be unique to your circumstances and your other skills. But I think the question is important. Thinking about the question will help you to figure out for yourself what direction you want to go and how far you want to go in that direction.
I mean, those are questions that I kind of want to try to unpack in this conversation today, because those are such good questions. Even as you ask them, it's so funny. I've said it to quite a few different people, talking about just being an entrepreneur and developing businesses of your own. I say it all the time. It's like, it might look like somebody has it all together, but when you really pull back the curtain, even people that are doing really well and have businesses that are flourishing, they don't have all the stuff that you think they should have, or that you need to have in place all figured out. They just don't. I've never come across a business, no matter how much money they're making, have it all ironed out. There's holes and gaps and room for improvement for every single business, no matter where they're at. And there are definitely areas of weaknesses for everybody. And so answering these questions are great.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you, I worked for the biggest, most successful company in the world for 7 years, an Apple, and that is a company that has not figured out everything. They have, like everybody else, as well run as that company is, as amazing as that company is, it has, just like everybody else, it has tons of issues it's constantly trying to figure out and resolve for itself. It's the normal state of things. What you see on the outside is usually a very carefully considered view for what the company wants to show to the outside, and what's going on inside can be completely different. And so it's normal if you don't know where you're at and where you want to get to. We do this as people too, right? We have our inner doubts, our inner issues, whether it's our self-confidence or what we believe we can achieve. And you know, that's also a normal thing. And I think overcoming those feelings, also, you benefit from having an approach that you can apply. Having an understanding, a framework to understand yourself, and a way to strategically think about taking the steps you want to take will help you to overcome a lot of those doubts and concerns, because at least you have a path that you can go down. At least you have a direction, a strategy that you can employ. And once you have that, then it's just about doing the work, right? It's less about trying to figure out what to do. It's more about just taking small steps and getting it done.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. I think that these are the kinds of things that we need to spend a lot more time thinking about. And when you ask certain questions, I've said this a lot to myself, probably over the last 5 or 6 months, questions are the answers. So asking these questions, and I was even thinking to myself, I wanted to ask you, when you talk about assessing your skills and how they work together, what's the best way for somebody to go about even taking that first step? Because that's a big step, just looking at what your skills are and saying, how do they work together? And then also then taking that next step and saying, okay, well, now that I know what my skills are and have thought somewhat through how they work together, how do I then apply that to helping me get further along the path of success or achievement in terms of applying those skills to something I want to be able to do? Those are two big things: figuring out what your skills are and how they work together, and then identifying those particular skills in terms of in relation to what you want to do. That's a big deal. So I definitely want to slow down and make sure that we address certain aspects of that.
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about your personal skills, there's really, in my mind, two things to keep in mind. One is you probably have the best sense of how much you know, and you're probably not the best person to judge what you know. If that makes so, yeah. So you might, when it comes to some topic, let's use Sudoku as the example because we talked about that earlier. You're the one who's going to know how much do you enjoy it, how long does it typically take you to do the puzzles, what types of puzzles give you the most challenges, and these things. Now, if you really want to get good feedback, you really want to know how good am I really, you're going to have to compare yourself to what the sort of the standards are for Sudoku. And I can't really speak to what Sudoku would be, but how fast do the best players solve these puzzles? What strategies are the best players employing? Sudoku feels like a weird example to me, but the reality here is having somebody else being able to analyze your play, whether that's a coach or that's a mentor or that's an advisor, or it's if you're in a company setting. And let's move away from Sudoku. The skill is, the specific work that you're doing for your job. Like when I worked at Apple, I had to do a lot of report building using an application called Business Objects. And Business Objects was a very complicated sort of enterprise reporting system that linked with tons of databases on the back end, and then it had sort of a front end that you could design the reports and build formulas and build lots of queries to pull data and merge all the data together. So you take a complicated program or application that you need to use on a daily basis, you're going to know yourself what you're good at and what you're confident doing and what you're not confident doing. That's knowledge that sits inside of you. But where that knowledge actually resides within the broader context of how far you need to go and how to get there, that you often need somebody else to give you a little bit of that feedback. And in my case, I had a team. I could work with the team and say, hey, the team would tell me, you're really good at this, you need to work on these things. And I could go ask them for tips on how to get better in these areas. And so having that back and forth with somebody else who could look at your actual output objectively and say, given the actual output I see, these are areas I think you can improve. And there might be a disconnect between how you feel about your skills and what they're saying. And often that disconnect is you feeling like you're not that good and other people telling you, no, you're really good at this, right? Like that's a very common disconnect for me, because I tend to be too focused on what I'm not good at and really aware of the flaws or the problems that what's the word I'm looking for? I want it where I'm not good at a particular skill. I'm very aware.
A shortcoming?
Shortcoming, thanks. Like something like that. And then, other people will say, no, maybe that's there, but that's not really even relevant because you're so good at what you do here that's a small thing. You don't need to worry so much about it. But it can go the other way. You can overrate yourself and you can think like, oh, I'm so good at this. And sometimes you need someone else to come and say, no, actually, what you really need to do is you need to work a little harder on these 3 areas, and then you'll get to where you think you are now, right? And that's what a good editor might do. That's what a good manager, a good mentor, or a coach will do. Is they're going to point out like, you're almost there, and let's work together to get through these next few steps to get you to where you want to be or where you feel like you're ready to be.
Yeah. No, that's actually, I think that's a good point then. So the feedback from others, getting some outside perspective is probably going to be the key then, to being able to properly assess what you think you're good at, what you think is compatible, and also to get some critical feedback. And then once you get that, taking that and then determining, okay, what's the next step for you in terms of development.
Well, has that worked for you, Jon? Like in your background, when you think about some skill that you've developed or a new job you've entered into and you've got to learn the job, I mean, do you find yourself relying on other people for that feedback in order to take the steps you need to develop the skills for that job?
That's a great question. And to be honest with you, yeah, because when I've been really closed off to that feedback, I find that you're closing yourself off to growth and improvement, because unfortunately we are all limited to a certain level of perspective on ourselves or on anything, honestly. So if you don't have somebody else's eyes, and ears and their feedback on what you're doing or what you're capable of doing, I think you're missing out on being able to find areas to improve and also to identify areas of strength as well, because sometimes we overlook our strengths. Sometimes we do focus too much on the negative, and that has helped me out a lot in the different jobs that I have had post professional running, and really being able to excel at those jobs. Like phone sales was completely foreign to me before I started working at Big Purple Dot, that CRM software company here in Irvine, California. And I without my mentors, specifically without Ron Sarmiento helping me and really coaching me and spending a lot of time with me, I think I would have been terrible at phone sales, even though I had the capability, the potential to do it. If I was closed off to hearing what he had to say, if I didn't just gobble it up and use it right away and make it my own through trial and error, man, I think I would have been way behind improving as a salesperson and learning marketing skills. A lot of the stuff that I now use today to build my own businesses and to even just improve my skills and learn new skills, that openness to his coaching allowed me to not only excel as a complete novice in phone sales to being really, really good and confident in phone sales and in sales in general. And I didn't know what my skill set was, but I knew what I thought of myself. And without Ron's feedback, if I was closed off to it and say, I'm just going to figure it out, I don't think I would have excelled at all in that particular job.
I think it's a really important aspect of improving is this notion that you can do it alone. You can do a lot alone, but you need to have the feedback. Whether that feedback is coming from yourself or whether it's coming from someone else, you have to get the feedback that actually points out not just where you can improve, but why you need to improve and how, and ideally, what's the best way to improve. Right. And that's where having a coach or having a manager or somebody who's experienced, a mentor who's done it before is so helpful, not just in pointing out that you have a problem to improve, because you might see that, like if you're in phone sales and you're not closing a lot of deals, you're very aware of the problem. Like, that there's
oh yeah.
Like, oh. So, but unless you have somebody who's actually kind of watching what you're doing and knows enough about the business and enough about the process to be able to say, if you make these changes here, it will help in XYZ ways. That's really difficult. I just feel this way about anything. Finding the right person to give you feedback is a really difficult challenge. And in some businesses, that person is your manager or it's very obvious and they're willingly giving you the feedback. But if you're, let's say, a college student and you're doing your thing and you're living your life in college, and let's say you're doing average in your classes and you're doing an average job in whatever activities you're involved in, and you want to get better, it might not be as clear who you should talk to. And there's a little bit of a challenge. You have to be a little bit creative and you have to start opening yourself up to finding creative ways to get that feedback about yourself, which is one step further than just being willing to hear it.
Right. So I think it's great. So this is great. So I want to step back and just, look at what we've said so far, because this is actually, man, it helps me out a lot as well. That's what I love about these conversations, because I think that unpacking this stuff is really cool. I'm realizing that there's so much to it, but I want to make sure that we improve on dissecting at least the conversation that we're having right now for our listeners. This is some really good stuff. So as we're talking about developing skills and why you should do it, what skills are important, how are you going to use them, where you're going to apply them, how long do you try to spend developing them, this is all really good stuff. I think, but one of the first things that's really important about skill development is identifying what you have right now and assessing the value of those skills and determining what you want to do with those skills and what role do they really have in what you want to be able to do, right? And then once you've kind of figured out the skills and what you want to do with them and their value to each other and what's going to really work together, it's being able to properly assess the skills that you have, where you're at, and determining what you need to improve, why you need to improve it, and how you're going to go about it. But one of the best ways is to find somebody who's already there, like a mentor or a coach, who has the experience, knowledge to really explain the why, identify what's missing, and then show you how to get there. I think that's two big parts: the identification of the skills and then the assessment, the proper, honest assessment of the skills. Because I think once you have those two, then you can go on to that next step, which is improvement. Am I getting it right? Is that kind of like what you're thinking as far as what
Yes.
we want people to get out of this particular conversation? What's the whole point of the skill development? Well, the first part is figuring out what you have and then what to do with it,
Yes, there's the two aspects of knowing about yourself and doing your own sort of self-analysis and then getting that feedback from somebody else, because they're probably not going to be in alignment. And when they're not in alignment, that is exactly where you need to focus. And sometimes that means you need to take a step back and say, oh, actually, I am really good at this, even if I don't feel like I am. And other times it's like, I need to do some more work here if I want to get to where I want to get. But that is exactly right. I think that external feedback, wherever it's coming from, you will not reach the level that you aspire to reach without that feedback. One of the key things about expert performers, and you'll know this, John, as a world-class miler, but every elite athlete, you have to have a you have to have a coach or a team or a training setting that gives you feedback that you can act on and make decisions on, right? And that identifies the areas where you're not performing up to your desired ability and pushes you out of your comfort zone to continue developing in those areas, right? The author, Erickson, I think is his name. I'm forgetting the author's name, but he wrote a book called Peak, and it's about expert performance. And he talks about this concept of deliberate practice in that book. And deliberate practice involves having a coach who gives you critical feedback and pushes you outside of your comfort zone. And it's an essential component to improvement and getting to the level where you want to get to. So yes, to recap, it is a fundamental point of improving your skills is getting feedback in whatever format that comes from.
The book is Peak, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise by K. Anders Ericsson.
K. Anders Ericsson, that's right. And this is an amazing book. He talks a lot about athletes and stuff, but he talks about chess players. He talks about, other fields. The fundamental principles of mastery of any field, it require a specific type of practice, which he calls deliberate practice. And I mean, this is a whole topic for another conversation probably, because I know it's literally, we could probably talk about just this topic for an hour, what he calls deliberate practice. But one of the key components is feedback into your practice routine and the willingness to take that feedback and act on it in a way that you focus and push out of your comfort zone. And it is a fundamental aspect of mastery of any skill that feedback is part of your practice routine.
Can you say that again? Pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone? That's what you said?
Yeah, so
I love that. Wow.
So the idea of how you practice dictates how good you get at any particular field. So I love this quote. There's a poker player named Richard Turner. That's not correct. Sorry. He's a magician and a card mechanic, and he can manipulate a deck of cards in amazing ways. He's one of the best in the world. And here's the crazy thing. He's blind. He can pull your card out of a deck of cards, and he can't see. Now, he will let you shuffle the cards and give them back to him, and he will find your card. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't think he's blind.
Surprise.
I know his secret.
That's hilarious. All this time
gosh.
we just solved the Richard Turner mystery right now.
Oh my gosh.
So Richard Turner has this quote that I think is just so perfect. He says, "Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect." And I love this because, as a kid, you'll be told, when you fail, when you make a mistake, they're like, practice makes perfect. Keep doing it, But the reality is, not all practice is the same. If you really want to improve, you can practice better. Like, you can actually practice like a professional. You can practice like an expert, and you can develop practice habits that are going to make you improve faster. And when I say practice habits, this means that if we're talking about studying a subject in school, this is how you study. If we're talking about learning a new software application like business objects at Apple, this is how do you approach using it in order to get better at it. And if you're talking phone sales, this is how do you get that feedback, and how do you get your repetitions, and how do you focus on the key points in the moment. And then, as you noticed, the phrase was get out of your comfort zone. If you're practicing within your comfort zone, you're not really improving. The act of improvement is an act of pushing yourself outside of what you're already capable of doing, of pushing yourself of pushing the boundaries of what you're capable of. Because by pushing the boundaries, you actually move those boundaries out, right? That's how you improve. And if you're not pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you might be improving, but you're not improving to the level you could be if you were practicing better.
I'll tell you the secret of how I improved from a guy that was barely ranked in our conference. We were in the Pac-10 conference when it was the Pac-10. Now it's like the Pac, 12
Pac-12,
or something like that. I'll tell you guys a little story. So this is an interesting thing to talk about in terms of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. When you talk about skill development and all this stuff. So as a world-class miler, I ran a road mile as fast as 3 minutes and 52 seconds. I've run a mile on the track as fast as 3 minutes and 54 seconds. And my metric mile time was 3 minutes and 35 seconds, which is almost the equivalent on the track of a 3:52 mile as well. So I almost broke 3 minutes and 50 seconds in the mile, which is about 9 seconds off the world record. Pretty cool stuff, but going into my last year in college, before any of that even happened, before I even became a sub 4 minute miler in my career, I was struggling with injuries and all this other stuff. And I remember going into my last year in college. Super simple story, guys. This is what happened. I was at the point where I was like, I had to make a decision. I said, well, this is probably my last year of competing at a high level as a runner. And I know that at some point, this is all going to be over. So I just kind of looked at each season, my cross-country season, my indoor season, and my outdoor season. I said, I'm just going to run as well as I can. I'm not going to stress it, but I'm just going to let things come to me. But I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to really push myself. I'm going to get outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to be I was willing to die, in my training. So I literally was willing to die. And if you ask any of my teammates in 2004, 2005, watching me train, they were in awe in a lot of ways and kind of like confused because they're like, dude, this guy, he's not finishing the workouts. He's pushing himself to the point of complete and utter exhaustion. He's passing out and throwing up at the end of almost every workout. But then they see me race, and I was racing at pretty much the highest level collegiately in my final year at UCLA. And the thing that I was choosing to do was run basically as far outside of my comfort zone as possible. I would tell everybody when they would ask me, any of my teammates, guys or girls, a couple conversations particularly that come to mind, and the person would always ask me, how are you doing that? What are you doing? What are you thinking when you're training? And I'd always say, and you know what this word is, Bryan? Lactic acid. I said, I was chasing the lactic acid. And they said, what? And I said, that's so uncomfortable when your body starts to fill, when your muscles start to fatigue and fill up with lactic acid, when your body is basically shutting down. I said, when the moment that comes, your brain tells you to slow down. You start backing off because you're basically going to redline, and then your body's just it's going to shut down. It's literally going to turn off on you because it thinks you're dying. And so in order to protect itself, it starts to fill up with lactic acid. It starts to shut down and slow you down, saying that's as hard as you can go. That's your threshold. And so I said, my whole logic was, and I didn't understand the science, I just understood physiologically how I felt and psychologically what I was telling myself. So I said, I'm going to tell myself the exact opposite. The more it hurt, when my body wanted to stop, the harder I would push. It was at that point that everybody else stops. Most people in the world will shut down. They'll actually say, oh, that's it. I have nothing left. My body's shutting down. I'm going to start backing off. I pushed harder. And I said, I was willing to die. And what happened was after a couple of months, especially in the wintertime, from like January to March, right before the spring, I was really pushing myself in all of our track workouts. I was passing out all the time. Coach would the whole team would be gone. I'd be on the track just laying there, sleeping for like an hour. I was so done. They couldn't move me. I was just trash. And I wasn't even finishing the workouts, but I was hitting the numbers or a little bit beyond it because I was like, I'm going to hit the numbers. I don't care if I can't finish it because a lot of times you're just like, as a runner, you just want to finish the workouts. Yep. I didn't care. I'm like, I want to die. I want to push myself to the brink. I want to see what I can really do because this is probably it anyway. And so what ended up happening was eventually that wall started moving further back. And the lactic acid took longer to build up. And then, believe it or not, eventually I stopped building up the lactic acid. My threshold was so high. It was so out of control. And it was absurd. It was otherworldly. I couldn't get tired. Because I broke through the barriers. I pushed the barrier. The threshold was so high, I was actually doing workouts at race pace. And I wasn't getting tired. And my recovery was faster. And so I lived in that space of discomfort because that's where I knew that if I wanted to become better, I said I had to get comfortable in practice being uncomfortable. I had to push harder in races when I felt that way. I would back off, or we would back off. People would back off because That's what you just do. And I said, if I could get better at being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I didn't know the wall was going to go as far as it did. I didn't know my threshold was going to improve so much, but I just knew that I had to get comfortable with it. And it was inadvertently, everything improved. My threshold improved, my tolerance improved, my confidence improved. And then my performances went from kind of okay conference to number one in the world. And it was because I lived in that place of chasing the lactic acid, chasing the discomfort, and just being okay, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I think that phrase, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I really like it because it's very general. And actually, I think your story is a story of running, right? And trying to reach that level. But anything you're trying to learn, like I'm going to go back to learning this software called Business Objects when I was starting off at Apple. And the reality is, in the beginning, I had to also be very comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm in there trying to pull data that I don't know what I can do and what I can't do yet. I don't know all the different tools that I have to do it. I have actual deliverables and deadlines I have to get done. I have to learn this software at the same time that I've got people monitoring what I'm doing and using what I'm doing. So you've got that stress of making sure it's right and how to double check everything and how to do all that stuff. And the reality is, if you're not comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you want to stay in your comfort zone, that will be an artificial limit on how much you can improve. That's going to determine how much you improve. If you're able to be uncomfortable and accept that that's just a part of getting better at something, that it has to be this way, and embrace it, and as you did, you can push the barriers back. And as those barriers start moving back, your level improves, your ability starts to get better, you start to learn more, you start to understand things in a more universal or holistic way, and now you can start strategizing on how to make yourself uncomfortable again, right? And find the next level of uncomfortable and push to get to the next level in whatever skill you're learning. Mm-hmm. This actually is good because it leads me to something I wanted to talk about, which is conceptually, I don't have a good name for it. I guess I would call them the levels of mastery. And I'd like to kind of talk with you about these because it's a concept that I use mentally. I don't really have it all worked out, and probably I'll write an article about it and try to work it out a little bit better. But I actually think that anytime you're learning a skill, you're going to go through certain stages. And those stages are pretty consistent across skills, although they differ in terms of how much time they take based off of whatever you're trying to learn, right? There's a very different thing between learning Sudoku and learning, organic chemistry or something, something like where you're trying to become an expert in some field that is really super complicated and has a ton of background knowledge you need to understand in order to be able to work in it. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, I want to walk through this a little bit, and then we can go back to some of these examples that we've talked about and talk about how we progressed a little bit through these and what it looked like to progress through them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have 5 levels. And I'll go through them one by one. I'll give a list real quick just so you kind of know what's coming. But level 1 is understanding. Level 2 is basic competence. Level 3 is fluency. Level 4 is creativity. And level 5 is mastery. And I think these 5 steps are a good general framework for thinking through how you're going to progress in anything you're trying to learn, in any field. The key thing here is, I would say that level 1 understanding is very quick to get to, and level 5 mastery is like a lifetime of work, right? The
right.
range here is, we're talking a really huge range. And that's because to go from one level to the next, it kind of takes about 10x as much time to go from one level to the next. That's a general framework in my mind, right? So if it takes you 10 hours to gain understanding, it might take you 100 hours to get to basic competence, and then 1,000 hours to get to fluency, and then 10,000 hours to get to creativity, something like this. That's the sort of idea of how the relationship between these. So understanding is very simple. It's just understanding the basic concepts of how what the skill is and what it works. If you're talking about a subject like a subject in school, it's understanding the basic ideas and concepts that are the framework of the study, right? It includes things like the key people who were involved in it, something who are the key figures, what are the key theories, what are the key ideas, and having an understanding of how that subject fits in the world. And if you're talking about a skill like an application, it's how did the application work? What are the basic features? What's the purpose? why do you use this application instead of a different application? You're just understanding its place in the world. You don't know how to do anything with it. You just understand why it's there and why it exists. And you might understand why some people have entire careers based on this thing, but literally your knowledge is just at the level of understanding. That's level 1. It's very, very basic. And I would say in general, level 1 is something you can get into for many things within, single digit hours. You can get an understanding of what it is, and other things probably more, right? Level 2 is usually, I think, what we think of as a skill. And when you're starting to do something, and that's what I call basic competence. It's the ability to, you can use the application. You can actually do work in that thing. You can execute on tasks, or you can have detailed conversations. You can have opinions about the topic. It's at a basic level, but the whole reason I call it basic competence is that it's enough to sort of get by, but it's hard work to get by. You haven't developed the skill set you need to be efficient. You just sort of have the basic knowledge. And so examples for me would be, as we're doing all these podcasts, it's like learning how to edit a podcast. This is the level I'm at right now. Like I can edit a podcast now. I've learned probably the 10 main skills I need to know to do it, but I'm not particularly efficient at it. I'm not great at it, but I'm good enough to be able to do what I need to do at this moment. And that's like a level 2, right? It's being able to do some work. Does that make sense for you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's a great way to describe the first 2 aspects of skill level and based on development, right? So yeah, I see that in your improvement with editing our podcast episodes. I feel like in the beginning, it's like we didn't know anything, so you had to gain an understanding. And then, of course, you started to develop. Once you've got that understanding, you're able to start applying that understanding to develop a basic competence. And now you've really improved. I mean, gosh, this is like our 10th or 11th episode, and which is super cool. So hooray for us,
right? Yeah.
But it's one of those things where I see your basic competence has allowed us to be able to produce that many episodes and to make progress and to keep inching towards a greater capability of producing quality shows, so all that stuff kind of comes in phases, and I see that just for you in terms of your example, I see that in you. So I think this is a very good description of those different aspects of skill level and based on development.
Yeah, and even that comes in stages, right? It's maybe in the beginning I got to basic competence with voice editing, and then I had to learn a little bit about music, or I had to learn about some more things. But all of these areas, if I go back to working at Apple and losing business objects, it was very similar. And applications tend to have the same sort of idea. Understanding what is the role of this application in the larger company, the way the company works, and how this application and the data is being used. What is the basic functionality that this tool can do? Like understanding what all that is, and then using the most important functionalities or features, knowing how to use them effectively and efficiently. That's about where you're at with basic competence. And then if you want to do anything really hard or new, well, now you got to go back into the learning mode, and you got to start digging in, and you got to start working hard at it, because you don't have that level yet. You're only at level 2. And level 2 is, I think, also very achievable for almost anyone in almost any skill. Anybody can get to level 2. Level 2 is actually a fairly straightforward level to get to. The reason is if understanding takes 10 hours and getting to basic competence only takes 100 hours, well, 100 hours is a few weeks of work, right? If you're going to work for your job, it takes a few weeks to get up to speed on the thing that you're learning often. And it's not that much time. It sounds like a lot, but it's really can be quite fast. And for some tasks, if the understanding is only takes, 20 minutes, well, maybe getting to basic competence only takes, a couple days, right? There doesn't take that much time.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these 2 levels, level 1 and level 2. And I think these are really standard. Everybody listening to this is probably at level 2 for so many skills, more skills than they can even count. They're at the basic competence level because they've put in some amount of work in the past to get to that level.
Right.
The next step is the really hard one. And this is the one where it feels like a big step up. It's just getting to what I call fluency. And that's a language term, but the reality is, like, you can use that when you're talking about using an application, or you can use that when you're talking about interacting and stuff. Being fluent in in the area that you're talking about means that you can do everything you need to do. You can understand every aspect of what you're trying to do. You can understand how it relates, how it connects, what you can do and what you can't do. You are fully competent at this point in the skill that you're trying to acquire, right? And this takes literally about 10 times as much effort as it takes to get to basic competence. From a language perspective, you can get to basic competence after I don't know, let's just, depends on the language probably, but after a certain number of hours of really productive study, you can get to basic competence where you're having conversations and you're getting by and you're living your life. Getting to fluency takes about 10 times as much time and 10 times as much effort because there's just so much more to learn to get to that level. And fluency with an application would be being able to know all the features and work in and out. If somebody asks you to do something and you know how to do it, you know the best way to do it, you're able to execute without having to go look at the manuals and check all the stuff. You just get busy working and get it done. And I think I'm thinking about running in this case, but fluency in running in this case is really knowing how to practice, knowing how to train, and knowing how to race, and getting to a point where you're running at or close to the peak of your natural abilities.
Yeah, that's well said. I was wondering what you were going to say in terms of what fluency looks like. Anyways, were you done? I was going to say something
No, go ahead,
about
please,
that.
Please. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I actually think that this totally applies to anything. And when it comes to running, for all you runners out there, for sure, this is definitely a great way to look at it, because I could look at it in terms of my own running career. I started out with the understanding, man, I read books like crazy. I looked at what other great runners did. I mean, I think the majority of my high school career was just like looking at the greats and reading the books, man. I mean, I read everything about Arthur Lydiard, Percy Surrey. These are coaches. Bill Bowerman, obviously Bob Larson, your former coach, a mentor of mine, Meb Keflezighi's coach. I read all kinds of stuff on Jim Ryan, maybe the greatest miler who's ever lived, and Steve Prefontaine. I mean, I would read all this stuff, and so I was gaining this understanding of that world, and I was gaining this understanding of some of the greatest who ever did it, right? And I was doing this, and that honestly, that framework, that understanding through the knowledge that I was gaining from the reading about these, the history of the running, the sport, and these athletes and coaches, allowed me to have a foundation to actually place basic competence on top of, so that as I was running more and spending more time practicing, I had an appreciation mentally of what I was doing physically and what I was gaining physically as far as that experience. And that helped me to develop, those two things helped me to develop a fluency of, okay, who am I as a runner? How do I want to show up? What are my skill sets right now that I'm good at, and what do I need to work on so that I can improve and become even better and become even more fluent in terms of being able to perform at my best ability? And that did take time. That fluency part took a lot of time. But I got to tell you, when I actually became fluent at it, I found myself being very creative. And it's funny to think, how are you creative in the sport of running? I actually was able to then step back and go, okay, I have an understanding. Obviously, I have basic competence, and I've become pretty dang fluent in the sport of running. The creativity came because once I knew I reached fluency, that naturally came up for me, where I'm like, well, how do I now do this thing in a way that's true to me, right? And I get to start being very creative with it. And I think the creativity, it makes sense. I was kind of debating, should creativity come after mastery? Because I'm like, how could you be creative if you don't have it truly creative if you haven't mastered it? I think they kind of go hand in hand. I think you kind of go back and forth between 4 and 5.
Right.
But I do believe that my creativity, and this is what I told myself, which is really cool, in that same year that I was describing earlier in this episode about, well, when I reached that level of excellence, right, where I was just crushing it and running, and I broke through these barriers of physically, where I was able to do more because I was able to tolerate more physically, I also found myself saying to myself before competition, wow, wait a minute, this isn't just a race anymore, it's a performance. So I started looking at my running as a performance. So Think about it. I'm running sub 4 minute mile pace. I'm running, 145, 146, 800-meter effort for half a mile, which is super crazy fast, world class. But I'm sitting there going, I'm going to play in the middle of
Right.
these races. I'm going to look at my opponents. I would find myself racing, looking at my competitors. I would stare at them. I would look around. I would feel the audience. I would run in a way where it's like, now I'm not just racing, I'm actually performing. And I felt differently when I competed, and I would sprint differently. Everything felt like I was actually performing. I felt very creative. And I got this feedback that was very interesting. I didn't tell anybody I was doing this. I didn't tell anybody I was even thinking this. But I remember the dean of UCLA was actually started to come to some of the races, and he was actually coming to see me perform because I was doing some crazy stuff. And luckily, we have an amazing stadium at UCLA, and so we had all kinds of people coming out to watch it. And he came up to me afterwards, and he said to me, "Jon, I hate running, but watching you makes me want to run."
Wow.
And that's crazy to me because I'm sitting there going, what am I doing, right? I mean, it's kind of funny. I knew what I was doing, but I'm like, wow, is what I'm doing, is how I'm showing up and how I'm actually approaching my racing now, because I'm being creative. I'm performing. I'm not just racing. I'm performing. I said, oh, man, they can feel that, you know? And so that is possible. I definitely think that the fluency leads to creativity, and then I think when you find yourself being really creative, you are mastering your skills.
Well, let me take one step about the creativity, and the reason I put them in this order, because your comment that they could be flipped does sort of make sense to me. But I think the reason I put creativity here is that when I see the next step after fluency, I'm really glad you shared your example, because when I say creativity, it's kind of finding your niche, like finding your way of expressing yourself in the skill that you've developed, right? Not only can you do all the basics and you know how this whole thing works, like you're an expert, you know how this works, but you have your angle, your unique ability. What you do is different from everybody else, and it sets you apart. And this level 4 creativity, I put it here at level 4 because I think it's the natural progression for most people. They get to the point where they know how to do everything they need to know how to do, and then they start to specialize a little bit more and start to find the thing that makes them special in that area, in the skill that they're trying to develop. And then mastery, to me, I think of this as you are like inventing new ways to do this skill. You're literally breaking ground, and that could be because you're making so many connections between the field that you've mastered and other fields. You're creating new connections. You're creating new area. This might be like the research scientist who's pushing so far down this path and making new discoveries. But if you're talking about running, these are the guys like, Kipchoge and Kenenisa Bekele and Haile Gebrselassie. Mastery for them wasn't just that they were able to put on a show while they were running. They were able to put on a show, and at the same time, no matter what the context, Olympic final, world championship, major marathon, it doesn't matter. They always performed. They always showed up. They always were on their game. They literally had mastered the sport to the point that they didn't have bad races anymore. They hit that level, which is different from being level 4 for me. Like, mastery to me is there's really no weaknesses. You can be creative in multiple ways. You can handle any situation. You immediately understand what you need to do when something new arises. And that's what I think of mastery. But it's kind of like a lifetime pursuit to get to that point, right? Like,
yeah. The two easiest examples of that are Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali.
Those are great examples. They're very clear. Yeah.
Very clear, because Bruce Lee, the guy, obviously, and that's why I think of Bruce Lee for sure. Like, it's very easy to think of Bruce Lee with these 5 levels of skill development in mind, because you know what Bruce Lee did. The guy created his own form of martial arts, called Jeet Kune Do. And I know so much about Bruce Lee because my dad was just so fascinated with Bruce Lee. He studied martial arts. He totally downloaded all of that onto my brother and I.
I'll be honest, I've done my deep dives on Bruce Lee too, so because he's such a fascinating person.
He was so creative after he became fluent, and so he was doing all this stuff. But then he was able to do so much more because he said, wait a minute, I could create something from this creativity. He wanted to be a master. He wanted to master his craft, and he was always working on it, always working on it. There wasn't a day, a moment in his life when he wasn't working on his craft. I mean, think about it. The guy died in his early 30s.
Yeah.
And look at what he did, between when he started doing it and when he unfortunately had passed away. And Muhammad Ali, I mean, the guy was doing all kinds of crazy stuff in the ring, and he was so good that he was able to do things in the ring that we had never seen before.
In both of these cases, I would say you and I probably have an understanding. We're at level 1, understanding about boxing or martial arts, because maybe you more than me. I don't know your background in martial arts or boxing, but
hey,
basic competence is where you get to when you've been practicing for a while and you've done it for a little bit. The basic things for the martial arts or the boxing. Fluency. I mean, any professional boxer, any black belt in martial arts, I consider them to be at the level of fluency. Like they can do. They know how to do what they're doing as professionals. Fluency to me is being a professional. That's basically where you're at. It's at that level of ability. Creativity is being a professional with a unique ability, with a unique niche, a unique angle on it, an ability to express yourself in a way that others can't, right? And it is to me a next level beyond fluency, because there's a lot of professionals, but there's not a lot of people who reach the level of really creativity. Reaching level 4 sets you apart from the rest of the professionals, I think.
Right.
Right. And then mastery is really, honestly, it's reserved for the best of the best, right? As soon as you see it, you recognize it, because it's just clearly at a level that is beyond what most of the best of the best, or the best of the most elite people can reach, right?
Tiger Woods.
I mean, Michael Jordan, the documentary The Last Dance is all about Michael Jordan, right? And
yeah, what a lot of controversy around that thing. But I haven't watched any of them. And I grew up on the Bulls, and I'm like, at some point I got to sit down and go through them. But yeah, just to say it, whoa, there's a lot of controversy around that, boy. Woo.
Let me say for this, like, we've covered these 5 levels: understanding, basic competence, fluency, creativity, mastery. This is a natural path that anybody has to go through. And you cannot jump from understanding to creativity, right? There is no shortcut to achieving a very high level of ability in any field that you want to dive into, that you want to study. But getting to basic competence is pretty quick for most fields. And getting to fluency is hard but achievable if you dig in and you do the work. Level 1, 2, and 3 are all 100% achievable. And my actual argument, as we sort of approach the end of our time for this podcast here, is that you do not need to achieve mastery. You don't even need to achieve creativity level to be successful. Those are something to aspire to if you have a particular skill that you want to pursue, and you feel that level of passion and that level of expertise that you want to pursue. Those are completely worthy pursuits. But it is often enough to get to fluency in a couple key fields, in a couple key skills, to get yourself to a level of fluency and combine those skills in a unique way. And now you are effectively becoming an expert or a master in an area because of the combination, not because of your ability in any one particular skill. And that's my idea of the skills network. Is the only path to success is not trying to pick a particular skill and being the best in the world at it. There are many paths to success based off of being able to develop a sufficient level of skills in a couple areas and combine them in a unique way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add to that. I don't want to take away from what you just said. I think that's a really great way to look at developing skills. This has been a really fun conversation, and I kind of want to leave it at that. I want the listeners to think about their skills and where they're at as far as the real clear understanding of it and wanting to develop it, and taking some steps to really identify what they want and where they're at with regards to the skills, and figuring out what they need to do to kind of get to the next phase of development for getting to where they want to be.
So on that point, I think what we talked about in the beginning is you probably already have some idea of what level you're at for the skills that you have, and that we need feedback from other people. I honestly think anybody at any point can get started on getting an understanding of a new skill. When we started to do the podcast, just to give a quick example, when we started to do the podcast, I just started reading about podcasting. That's what getting an understanding is. It's like, what software do we use? What does it take to set up a podcast? All these resources are online, YouTube, blogs, everything. There's tons and tons of resources out there, books. You can start getting into this and just getting the understanding. And then basic competence, again, I just use YouTube videos and blogs and tutorials and forums and whatever to solve the problems I had and to start working through to get to a certain level. Level 1 and 2 are 100% achievable and something you can do in your spare time. Like, you can do it in your spare time if you focus and you strategically approach developing it. Once you get to level 2, there's no need to go to level 3 unless you decide that that's where you want to go. You can get to level 2, basic competence, and at that point, that's when you make a decision. Do I want to become a professional at this, or do I want to hand this off to a professional and focus my efforts on something else? Mm-hmm. And the key thing here is that having a basic competence in a field has so much value, even if you never pursue it directly, becoming a professional. I don't expect to become a professional podcast editor. Maybe I will, but I don't really expect that to happen. But having learned now some of what I've learned about editing podcasts, I can see already that it's opened up a different way for me to interact with people, to have conversations, to understand a whole different world of business and entertainment and publishing that I didn't have before. And that knowledge, I think, is valuable in and of itself because it can be combined with other things. And once you start combining that with other things, now you're getting a lot of value, even though you're not a professional or a master or at that really high level. So if you're looking at starting a new skill, start with understanding, start with doing some work and reading and seeing if you want to pursue it further. And when you do start developing the skills, find somebody to give you the feedback so that you can develop those skills in an efficient and productive manner.
Mm-hmm. It's a great place to start. I definitely feel like this is a conversation we're diving into more, but I hope that you guys enjoyed talking about, skill development, seeing value in looking into this further into your own skill set. And I'm excited to dive into this in additional episodes. And please, guys, feel free to leave feedback. Let us know what you think. The more feedback we get about these kinds of conversations, the better we'll be able to dive into them deeper, provide more insight and thought, and also obviously share more stories about like what we're learning, how we're applying it. Just to say it and close it out, I mean, we're just two guys, learning how to do all kinds of new things, and also learning how to improve on the things that we are already really are passionate about and want to improve on. But these kinds of conversations are helpful to us, and I hope it's helpful to you guys as well, because there is a lot of value in thinking about these types of things so that you can improve and ultimately go be more.
That's it. Let's end it here, John. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bryan. Great conversation. Love the topic. Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in. You can find links to any articles or items we referenced in the show notes. Please subscribe and be sure to give us a rating. And remember to tell a friend about the show. The Go Be More podcast is produced by Go Be More Apparel. Check us out at gobemore.co. For all of us at Go Be More, we are what the world is chasing, and we hope this podcast helps you become what the world is chasing too.